Greetings, friends. It's me, Wayman29, and this is a video going out to Love Jesus Please. Thanks for the video response, and I didn't necessarily need my ego stroked. We're just trying to get through some stuff, some differences, and I think that becoming Christian would be a step backwards for me, and would limit my ability to explore the text in the way that they're going. And for I believe it's Yiyo who posted the Ravi Zacharias video concerning the Trinity and the play on words. I really like Ravi Zacharias. He's very smart, and he's probably one of the few Christian apologetics who've read more anthropology than a lot of others and have studied world religions. And since he is a Christian apologetic, I would expect him to have such views and not think differently. But my reply to that video would be Deuteronomy 32:39. If I was going to take the Jewish side and oppose it, see now that I, even I, am He, and there is no God with me. I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand. For I lift up my hand to heaven and say, I live forever. It's beautiful. So now, addressing Love Jesus Please, as the Bible or New Testament, and Jesus being the Bible continuing into the New Testament as a continuation of the Old Testament, that is not the case. It was written and crafted to be as such, and it was carefully placed in that order to appear as such. And so that is how it is constructed. And references in the New Testament to the Old Testament to make it appear that there is a continuation, a lot of times when you look at those references, they're taken out of context, and we will look at some of those. Either the New Testament writers had issues in remembering the text or the correct context that they were used in the Old Testament, or the New Testament writers were not Jewish to begin with, some of them, and so you had issues. One example of this would be Matthew. The 11 examples where it uses Old Testament to fulfill some kind of scripture is used as addagah, or interpretation, and it was intentionally taken out of context and referenced to meet the ends, or to meet the goals of the text that the writer was trying to convey. This was done quite a bit. You can see this happening, addagah happening throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls also, especially in the Old Testament prophets and the way the Qumran community translated that. However, they knew the Jewish text, and they did a little bit better job than the New Testament writers. So the 11 times in Matthew that where you have such a reference as it was spoken by the prophet, for example, a rough how that cycle would go. A lot of the times, the correct context is not there, and it's intentionally skewed to portray Christ as being that fulfillment. So let's look at something you mentioned, Psalms 110. Psalms 110, a psalm of David. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Look at this in Hebrew. La David, Mizmar, Naam, Adonai, or Jehovah, La Adonai. This Lord is different. This is what everybody mistakes. I believe these are the vowels of Yahweh with the consonants of Adonai. Either way. Some religious groups make a big deal about Jehovah or Yehovah, but if you look that up, it's used in place of Yahweh, so that one would not pronounce the name of, or the divine name. Well, Adonai means Lord. Very different. So now we're going to look at the Net Bible comments. They have some great comments about this. And we'll see what they have to say. This is the Net Bible comments, the New English Translation, 2006, from www.bible.org. Here they're pretty honest. Psalm 110. In this royal psalm, the psalmist announces God's oracle to the Davidic king. The first part of the oracle appears in Psalms 110, 1, the second in 110:4. So this is written in chiasmus. Psalms 2 is also related to this, probably around the same time period. In Psalms 110, 2 and 3, the psalmist addresses the king, while in Psalms 110, 5 to 7, he appears to address God. The word Nahum is used frequently in the Old Testament for a formal divine announcement through a prophet. So, because this word is used, this shows that this psalm was delivered through some kind of person who was believed to be a prophet. Here they comment on my Lord, as we see in Matthew. In the psalm, the original context, the speaker is an unidentified prophetic voice in the royal court. In the course of time, the psalm is applied to each successive king in the dynasty, and ultimately to the ideal Davidic king. New Testament references to the psalm understand David to be speaking about his Lord, the Messiah. And it gives these references. To sit at the right hand of the king was an honor. In Ugaritic myth, the artisan god Ketorwasis is described as sitting at the right hand of the storm god Baal. Ketorwasis is it's pronounced a bunch of different names. This is the craft god who made 2 clubs for Baal to overcome, I believe, Mut, or Mot, or death. The Lord's invitation to the Davidic king to sit down at his right hand reflects the king's position as the Lord's vice regent. When the Lord made this covenant with David, he promised to subdue the king's enemies. Here we get that in 2 Samuel 7, 9 to 11, and Samuel 89, 22 to 23. So that's pretty interesting. Also, the prophet Joel was brought up in his video. The Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, is laid out much different than the Christian formulated Old and New Testament. The books are in different order. I believe the last 2 texts in the Tanakh are Chronicles. So Joel was probably during the Persian period or during around the time of Josiah. There's a couple different theories on that. He discusses plagues, and he has visions of the ideal Davidic kingdom. And at this time period, who did not? They were facing huge challenges as a nation, worried constantly about being taken over, and It was a huge issue of negotiating and with other nations just so that they could survive. You see such visions happening in Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the Deutero-Isaiah, the last from 56 to 66, third Isaiah, has some great visions. And all of these texts were used for totally different meaning once you get to the New Testament. Addagah is used heavily. I'm sorry, everywhere I used addagah in this video, it's Pesher. Pesherism was used heavily. I apologize. So we see the name that's used here, it's Adon, Lord, and it is not a divine idea of a Lord, even though it's master. So here we can see that clearly once again. The New Testament takes this out of context to make it fit into their use of Pesherism. Is that a bad thing? No. It was done all throughout. It was even done in the Old Testament. Even Joel used a lot of language from other prophets like Amos and Hosea. Probably his contemporaries, maybe, in those texts. So I don't really see it as a continuation. It was crafted to be that way, and I think that a lot of issues arise just from not knowing how the texts were composed and not reading enough Old Testament to understand what's being said in the New. And I think the text that was mentioned in Matthew, where Jesus refers to Psalm 110, Jesus was making the point that the king necessarily did not have to come from a Davidic line. And you also can see how Matthew crafted the genealogy into the generations of 14, and each, where some major event happened every 14th generation. He messes with the names. By the time you get to verse 8, if you compare that with Chronicles, you see a glaring issue. Is that a big deal? No. The Wars of the Jews, Josephus, did the same thing, except it was in a 40-year scheme. So that is why I see it as separate. Many scholars, especially evangelical New Testament, say that there was 400 years of silence between Old Testament and New Testament. That is incorrect. You had plenty of texts that were being developed. Dead Sea Scrolls would fall into this and everything in between. And all those texts that maybe didn't exactly get into the New Testament for some reason, and people voted it out, were there. And there was no silence. Writings were constantly being written, and the divine was very much alive as a spirit, moving people to do heroic things, especially in the text of the Maccabees in retaliation to the Greek Hellenization. So, that's my opinion on it. I cannot be Christian for that reason, although I do appreciate the work that fine Christians do if they're actually out there doing things rather than talking about it and living the teachings of Christ rather than just reading about them and talking about them. So I can appreciate the background. I like the literature. I understand where the writers were trying to come from, and I understand for the most part how it can be applied to benefit the lives of many people. So on that note, thanks for the conversation. It was very interesting, and I hope this was also interesting to some viewers. to work out some questions and maybe raise some questions about where we are and what we're doing in this life. So take care, friends, and remember, if everybody's thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking.